So you notice when we looked at the intro, it was an upside down pyramid. What we've now got for the conclusion is a pyramid here the right way up. And whilst the introduction went from broad to narrow, the conclusion is flipped in structure and it goes narrow to broad. It does basically consist of the same two parts: summary and synthesis of essay, which is a bit like focus of essay, and then context. But it's reversed in structure: summary and synthesis, and then context. So let's quickly go through both. So summary and synthesis is about restating the essay's aim. More often than not, the first sentence of a conclusion won't be "in conclusion, blah, blah, blah." It will more often than not restate the essay's aim. So it will say something like, "This essay has focused on." Try and avoid saying "in conclusion." It's very cliched, and no, it's just completely unnecessary, because firstly, there's normally a subheading that says conclusion, but more often than not, the tone and the register should be clear in terms of you're reflecting back on what you've done. So this essay has focused on. So the register and the tone there is reflective. So you're looking back on what you've done. And what this part of the conclusion really is about is it's about summarizing the most important elements. What's the argument or conclusion? What's the general takeaway message you want your reader to understand from this? And I've said there, give the reader a single overarching message, because it's not about all of the little components at the end. It's about how all of those little components fit together, form a whole. They don't want you just to repeat each part again. They don't want you to say, "Oh, in this part I did this and showed this, and in this part I did this." They don't want that. They can read the essay again. What they want you to bring it all together, restate the purpose of the essay, summarize those most important elements, and bring it together to form a single clear message, which could be an argument or just an overarching conclusion or concluding thoughts. That's what they want you to do. So summary and synthesis, that's what that's about. Context. If you ended on summary and synthesis, that would be okay. That would be fine. But if you really want to elevate the quality of your writing in terms of inclusion, then you shouldn't end on a very narrow point. Actually, what you should do is try and end on a wider point. You should try and widen out at the end. And the way to think of this is feeding that single message and the essay's focus back into the wider context. And one of the ways that you can do this, and a very clever way that you can do this, is think of it as though you're going all the way back to the beginning and revisit the themes and ideas that you presented right at the beginning of the intro, in the first 2, 3, 4 sentences, and try and explicitly revisit those themes again and position the focus of your essay and what you found and what you've observed and what you've encountered into that wider context. And what that does is it brings the discussion to a close, but without it being too definitive in terms of closing off the discussion, because that's not what you want to do. The reason this is important is in academic writing, particularly published papers, the conclusion is never the end. It's an evolving piece of research. It will keep moving forward, and people will pick up what you've done and they'll carry it forward. Now, granted, this is slightly different because it's an essay. It's not an original piece of research, but it's the same principle. It's the idea that you don't end on a narrow point, but you end on a wider point that stresses the wider significance of what you've done. And it depends on the context. This can be very important in different ways. In a sort of medical health-based context, for example, when you get to the end of a case study, for example, it's no longer just about that case study. It's about what that case study represents. When you talk about a particular educational technique, for example, in learning, it's no longer just about that one educational technique, but it's what it represents in terms of the wider educational landscape. So think carefully about that.